I understand the next call is a split call. Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I'm glad that Mike Sabin has had his opportunity to have his daily rant. There are some things that I've agreed with him, and there are some things that I have disagreed with him on. But I'll get to the stuff that I agree with him soon. It'll be a very short part of my speech. Mr Speaker, what I did disagree with him in is that side of the House has got some kind of long-standing and deep record on law and order, which that it relies on a lot, but is actually quite shallow. He says that on this side of the House, any move that we've taken in these areas has been. I think he said we were sitting on our hands. But as Mr Goff has pointed out in his speech, the changes that the last Labor government made in the areas of sentencing, parole and bail are much more fundamental than the changes that are taking place in this bill. So I fundamentally disagree with Mr Sabin on that issue. Mr Chair, I just did want to begin by acknowledging the other members of the Law and Order Select Committee. I know we've had our challenges as of late, but I do see Mr Mitchell, Mr McKelvey, yourself, Mr Speaker, David Clinton and also Richard Prosser. The process of listening to the many submissions with the bail amendment bill, I think as Mr McKelvey said, was challenging. We had a lot of submitters who had very emotional stories to tell, and I think all those people who did come through with some personal stories are all very, very brave. And I did want to point out two people. The first one being Tracy Marceau, the mother of Christy Marceau, and also someone who, at the session that we had in Auckland, stood out for me was Charlie Burrell, the father of Augustine Burrell, a young man who was killed by someone who was out on parole. Mr Speaker, as said, the Labor Party will be supporting the bail amendment bill. One area where I do agree with Mr Sabin is that we do support the reverse onus of proof operating in cases where I think it was Class A drugs and serious offences. We support. Excuse me? I prefer not to listen. Mr Speaker, we do support that reverse onus of proof because that will put more of an onus on the judges to look more carefully, especially at the high-risk cases when making their discretion about applying or whether or not to give bail. And I guess in the case of Tracy Marceau, that is certainly one case we heard a lot about during the submission stage, that would have made a difference. Mr Sabin also talked about the discretion of police to arrest youths without an arrest warrant. We also do support that with a proviso that, and this is something that the youth court judges said, that it needs to be clearly exclude the trivial while providing the police with the ability to be effective when faced with serious and significant breaches of bail with young people. As Mr Prosser said in his speech as well, we think that an issue that the government does need to address is the serious delays in the court system that is creating long periods of time for people waiting for their cases to be heard, which is increasing the likelihood of offending while out on bail. And another thing, a practical thing that the Select Committee heard was around a risk assessment tool that may be able to be provided for the judiciary. I understand that the Corrections Department does have one called Rockroy, and there was some talk about being able to see if we could implement a similar risk assessment tool for the judiciary to use. Hopefully that is something that is followed up by the government when it starts implementing some of the changes in the bail amendment bill, because we think that is one practical way that could help. But just to finish up, Mr Speaker, this is a bill which we hope will make a difference to a lot of people who we don't want to have the same experience as the people who came to us and submitted to the Select Committee.
Mr Speaker.
I call Jan Logie.